Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever it is that you may be tuning in to get this weekly video announcement information session, whatever we want to call these. Check in every Tuesday morning is always good, just to see what's going on for the class for the week. So we should have finished. You should have read Two Women. I guess first I'll just want to say excellent work for this week. For everybody I'm recording this and I will be recording all these on Sunday evening sometime, just the way my week works. But I won't be posting it until Tuesday morning. But anyway, because sometimes I may need that lag time. First of all, yeah, like I said, excellent work for all of those who turn in your work by, like, Friday night is always good. Saturday night is the latest. We'll talk about that in house cleaning. For the discussion post, if you'd like, if you prefer, and you have until the end of the semester to find 15 sources on your own. It's my hope that you want to participate in the class and you're checking in and you're an avid user. You're on Blackboard, you're active in the course. That you're going to be posting one of these each week. And so to do that and to get some kind of feedback and dialogue going amongst us, I'll be able to provide meaningful commentary up until like Friday evening or something, and then after that, I'm probably not going to get back and provide much of any commentary if you post after that time, because I just don't see where it's useful for where we are in our discussion of the class. So in a way, the discussion posts are there for you to do 15 of them, but it's also there to that's going to drive our discussion and where we sort of go with the class. So as we participate in these, some themes will start to develop just based on our interest. Even for this week, we were talking about, so if you want meaningful feedback, then be sure to post by Friday. Otherwise, you can post 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now. I probably won't say much unless it really catches my eye. I'll read it and I'll look at it, and you'll receive the credit, but it's just not going to be part of the ongoing conversation of the class. For those of you who did post early this week, I thought we had some really interesting sort of discussions around, everything is as broad ranging as the conditions, the delivery of healthcare systems and the mass inequity in the delivery of health services in a country like Canada with socialized medicine, and how poorly they serve indigenous communities. And that's not alone to sort of jurisdictional issues over, in some ways, how is a Native American, for example, or a member of a federally recognized tribe established in the United States. I didn't get into a comparison to where there's a slight difference in the way that membership and tribes sort of carries over from country to country. It's going to be different in each national jurisdiction in which we enter, to the really interesting one about some indigenous folks from now what's known as Mexico, Mixtecs and Taquiques and Ticas and Zapotecs, I think it was, and how interesting it was that they're here in the United States, they have the right to get a driver's license, but no one can deliver a meaningful test. They're afraid of a language barrier because they don't speak Spanish. And it's often sometimes, I think, in our current sort of discussions, in our current conversations, public conversations, and even those we may have privately, amongst ourselves, we have a real tendency to see everything south of, say, New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas as somehow some monolithic, some mono sort of cultural thing. It's Mexico, or this idea of something known as a Mexican, right? It's supposed to be this thing, this identifiable thing with certain traits, when in fact the multiculturalism of Mexico would rival, if not put to shame, that of the United States, right? Especially in the multicultural, multi-tribal sort of cultures that are there in Mexico. And great empires have been in that part of the world even prior to the U.S. empire, right? Aztec Empire, Mayan Empire, Inca Empire, massive empires, right? That were in place at the beginning, pre-Columbian. And ongoing in the Spanish period. And I'm going to get to a conversation about that more here in just a minute, because I'm leading us into Almanac of the Dead, but I wanted to take a moment to sort of back up and briefly talk about Two Women and why I had us read it first. And if you didn't read it, I strongly suggest that you go back and read it. It's a short story. It's straightforward. It's mythic. It's legendary. It's also a story that was told to Velma Wallace by her mother. So it's also a story that's still actively being passed down orally from one generation to the next. And I can assure you that the Athabascans are probably still telling this story or some version of it amongst themselves, right? I'm just going to guess, right? I'll make that assurance. I could be proved wrong, but I have an idea that this is an ongoing story. And the reason I have us read it is because I think it in many ways, I mean, some of the themes that come up in it, at least for me anyway, and you can disagree with me, and please do so in a discussion post if you do, that, I mean, there's this idea of a society, any society, right? And I think even though we're talking about some small sort of tribal culture, we could take this and break it out into something that's much larger, right? This microcosm of how human beings should interact. And not people who are trying to become human beings, but real human beings, right? At least in Cherokee philosophy, where I'm from, there's this idea that many of us in this world may be human becomings, and a human becoming on our way to sort of being a human being. And to be a human being means to learn to live in respect to all living things on the earth, right? That's what it means. If you reach that, then you're a human being. And if you don't, then you're always just this sort of human becoming, right? And many people can get stuck in this sort of idea of trying to become human being throughout an entire lifetime and never escape it. And there's other sort of things that will happen to them after that. But so in many ways, that central concept, that's how I relate to this idea of the society and coming down to these vital sort of resources, right? And how this community makes a decision as resources begin to get scarce. Not unlike, resources are finite. And when we as human beings use them, then we do so at a cost, because some of them are, all resources on this earth are finite in some way. And so, as we as human beings use them, they're going to become scarce. And the decisions that we make amongst ourselves as they become scarce are in many ways what determine how we go into the future and whether or not we may even exist as a species into the future, right? That's a biological sort of aspect of the story, I suppose. And so the leadership of this community makes that decision, and it's like a crisis of leadership, right? It's a crisis anytime you have a leader of anything, whether it be a federal government, whether it be a state government, city government, whatever. You can have a crisis of leadership where leadership seems incapable of, or even the decision that they make is one which is reasoned and rational decision, right? And how they treat the two old women. But although it may seem irrational, right, to turn your back on a loved one in a time of such scarce resources, maybe it was a rational and reasoned decision for the people to go on. I mean, you can imagine what life must be like above the Arctic Circle, right? When resources get scarce in the winter, it begins to be a very serious thing between starvation and survival or not. And so they make a decision that they think is rational. You may see it as irrational. The two old women then begin to rationalize their own lives and take stock of themselves and learn and grow. And so does the community who leaves, those family members who leave. That process is still ongoing and dynamic, even though this decision was made. So, the end is yet to be determined. And so everyone sort of learns and grows. And then when they come back, they form this more perfect or more meaningful sort of society, and one of which is learned on the value of each other, right? They form this society, which is, some may call it socialistic, I guess. I mean, because it's, to each according to their needs and from each according to their abilities, right? It's a famous Marx quote, but it's very much, you could take, and Marx learned much of what he did from indigenous populations, make no mistake, in observance of them, study them, as a matter of fact, visited here in North America, but for a very brief time. But there's this idea, right, within that story that it lays a foundation of how a society should sort of behave and treating all members within it as equals, and sharing with them the resources that every member of that society needs in order to sort of go forward, right? And that's a bit of a radical concept, perhaps in some ways. It sounds easy, right, in the beginning, and then when one scales it up, globally, let's say. It seems as though, you could take the teachings there, and it's a model of how to sort of live your life, I think. And I think it lays, I'm not universalizing, and by universalizing I mean saying because this story of two old women exists, of these Athabascans up here in Alaska, that because they exist that way, then all indigenous populations have the same philosophy. I'm not saying that at all, because there's radical differences, right? It's, the multiculturalism that is amongst indigenous populations in the world is phenomenal, right? Radically different, as any two cultures can be. But at the same time, there does seem to be this sense of stewardship, right? That I think is important, and I think you will find many similarities of this that go universal or cut towards a very large swath of indigenous philosophical underpinnings and what they understand human beings' role in the life is. And make no mistake, that indigenous populations philosophize and theorize and make sense of the world and process it like any other society on this planet, right? Whether they be this idea of having first worlds and developing worlds and third worlds and fourth worlds is all bullshit, right? Essentially, human beings interact with this world and work towards survival of their understanding of themselves and how to behave through philosophical and theoretical underpinnings. And every society does that, and so does this one. And so, this idea, I think it's important to keep that in mind as we go forward in reading Silko. Backing up to Silko, here it is, right? I'll hold up a copy of it. I've got a copy here. Here's Almanac of the Dead, right? It is a fabulous novel. Here's Almanac of the Dead. It is all of 760 some odd pages. Let's see, let's get all the way to the end. I believe it's 763 if I'm not mistaken. Even more than that. Yeah, 763 pages, right? Make sure I don't lie to you. Yeah, 763 page novel. Don't let that scare you. It's the first time I've ever taught this novel. I want us to have fun with it. I've read it a few times, right? It's the first time I've ever teaching it. Let's allow this novel to take us where it leads us, okay? This is a big book. We're going to read about 100 pages a week. You need to read the first 100 pages up to book 4, I think, of part 1 of the story. This book is global in scope, right? We should take a look at the map, right? And it is a tragic novel. And I should forewarn you, if you need trigger warnings for anything, violence, drug use, right? Get ready. I mean, because it's in this book, right? You're going to be reading about very tragic, very real, very believable, but also fantastic, realistic, magically realistic. Stretching the bounds of maybe reality in some ways, right? But always grounded in a very much a historical reality of a history of indigenous genocide in the last 500 years, right? Be sure to look at the stories. Try to get it up closer, right? The way it's laid out. Be sure to look at the table of contents, right? Read about the story. Read about Silko online. If you don't know about her, maybe I'll post a couple of biographies real quick online. Of her. I could, maybe I'll post it up. I'll post up a link. There's a biography of her, but it's kind of dated, but it's not nice, but it's also made around the time she makes this. But look at this map, right? This is on like page, I don't know, it's not marked by the page, but it's early on in the book, right? Look at this map and where she scopes out from in Tucson, Arizona. And I want to read a couple of captions just so you sort of realize what it is that you're about to read, because it's a meandering book, and don't worry, it's 763 pages. We're going to read about 100 pages a week or so, maybe less, between, for the next 7, 8, 9 weeks, right? This is the bulk of our reading for the course. We might even go a little beyond that, and then we'll read Potiki, and then we'll start watching some films towards it, if we have time left, right? So, and also depending on how our discussions go, maybe we'll slow down this reading a little bit. But Almanac of the Dead. This says here, this is the 500-year map. What I'm holding up here, right? It says through the decipherment of ancient tribal text. Let me get my glasses. Start again. Through the decipherment of ancient tribal texts of the Americas, the Almanac of the Dead foretells the future of all the Americas. The future is encoded in arcane symbols and old narratives. Prophecy. When Europeans arrived, the Maya, Azteca, Inca cultures had already built great cities and vast networks of roads. Ancient prophecies foretold the arrival of Europeans in the Americas. The ancient prophecies also foretell the disappearance of all things European. It's Tucson, Arizona, home to an assortment of speculators, confidence men, embezzlers, lawyers, judges, police, and other criminals, as well as addicts and pushers since the 1880s in the Apache Wars. And here's something that says the Indian connection. 60 million Native Americans died between 1500 and 1600. Read that again. 60 million Native Americans died between 1500 and 1600. The defiance and resistance to things European continue unabated. The Indian Wars have never ended in the Americas. Native Americans acknowledge no borders. They seek nothing less than the return of all tribal lands. That's laying down, that lays down a pretty strict understanding of the world. And I guess we may want to begin. She speaks there of the Indian Wars. We may want to talk about, in some ways, how she defines, how one may define wars, right? Certainly militaristic wars between natives and U.S. federal government and Mexico have sort of ceased, but there's other wars, I think, and other battles that are constantly being fought. Political, almost always in nature, right? And legal battles, right? Indigenous warriors of the 19th century and even became legal warriors in the mid to late 20th century, and that continues to be the case today. That by and large, wars that are fought between indigenous populations and multinational corporations or nations, large sort of recognized nations, modern nation states, let's say, not to think that indigenous populations are not modern, but what we consider to be the modern nation state, large nations like the United States. Those battles are fought and wars are fought as legal wars. And believe it or not, oftentimes treaty rights are upheld in U.S. federal courts. We'll see what the future holds, right? Because legal rulings change all the time. So, this novel lays out this tragic, I will forewarn you, it is a complicated novel, but I want you to read through it, read through the first 100 pages. You'll be able to follow along. You're introduced to many of the foundational characters, but it starts out, you've been sort of forewarned. It's a novel that looks at all sides of life. I'm gonna put it that way. So read the first 100 pages. Check in with your discussion boards. Again, everybody who produced such good work last week, thank you for checking in so early. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. If you haven't finished your work yet and you're reading this, then you need to start doing some discussion posts. Check in with me if you have any questions, if anything's unclear, and I will talk to you next week. You'll see this on Tuesday morning. All right, thanks so much. Bye.